symmetry is intuitively perceived as something unnatural and hence potentially dangerous. And thus, perfectly symmetrical creatures and images are quite terrifying, at least in comparison to their almost exact copies, but with slight asymmetry to them, right? And human faces and bodies need at least a slight bit of asymmetry as well to still be recognized as human, as being alive and beautiful, potentially attractive. Otherwise, they would easily fall into this sort of uncanny valley. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I wish to discuss symmetry. And of course, there is this sentiment as, oh, symmetry is so beautiful, everything is symmetric, everything is cool, especially in those kinds of, alternative science communities. They enjoy like all this cymatics and symmetry and bloody blah blah. And even like regular physics and mathematics enjoy symmetry a lot, of course. Well, arguably because it allows them to actually calculate stuff much easier, right? Something like that. But I would make a case for asymmetry, actually. So this argument that I've just gave you, that symmetry is beautiful, I think it actually follows from recognizing symmetry where you didn't expect to find it, something like that. Then you are fascinated indeed. Oh, I thought it would be so chaotic, but it's so ordered and symmetrical. So it gives you this feeling of power, which again, we've discussed many times on this channel. So it is perceived as beautiful, right? But I would claim that still, after all, in general, the actual symmetry, and again, it's an unpopular point, I understand, but it is something that I specifically wanted to make a video about, right? So I would make a case that actual symmetry is frightening and almost unnatural, right? Maybe not even almost, which is not something, again, people talk about. And yeah, except for an honorable mention here, William Blake, right? Hence the possible title of this video, which is Fearful Symmetry, right? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry, right? So this is an honorable mention. So one example of why that is the case is insects. Like, I know many people love insects, but I personally, like, again, I'm expressing my own opinion here, but I think it's can be generalized. So I think insects are really frightening. And at the same time, as you can see, they're strikingly symmetrical, right? Like in absolute majority of the cases. And many other disgusting beings are also strikingly symmetrical, right? So that's a hint that maybe I could be right on some level at least. Like my personal top, I don't know, 5 of these horrible creatures are butterflies, actually. I don't know why people say that butterflies are so beautiful. Oh, they were such a horrible, like, whatever this thing, caterpillar or whatever, and then it turned into a beautiful butterfly. I think caterpillar are much milder in terms of looks than a butterfly. Like, a butterfly is a really horrifying creature. Like, not only it looks horrible, it also has these huge wings, right, which also look horrible oftentimes, actually most of the time. And so it can get you anywhere, That's my point. At least caterpillars don't have wings, so they don't look as frightening. So from here follows my hypothesis is that maybe insects are, their symmetricalness looks so frightening because in reality they're slightly asymmetrical. They probably are. Nothing is perfect, that kind of sentiment. But they're just usually too small for us to notice any noticeable asymmetry, right? So they look very symmetrical and hence very frightening. And by the way, well, I'm not only talking about insects per se, but also about, I forgot the proper biological term. Well, spiders basically and other things like that. Spiders are not insects, obviously, right? So yeah, and yeah, let me reiterate that symmetry may be, all right, I'll probably get this point once more near the end somewhere. So there may be obviously other factors of disgustingness except for symmetry, but here I'm talking about symmetry mostly. Like one of the factors is number of legs, potentially. Like I'm a very, how would you say, like a quadrupedal chauvinist in this sense. Like I perceive everything that has more than 4 legs at the very least suspicious, right? So yeah, there's that. Okay, so that's one point, the insects, right? Another point is human faces, all right? So there have been many studies and many hypotheses of this sort that, well, actually, you know, that symmetrical face is more attractive than asymmetrical face. But I've looked into it, like specifically before I recorded this video, because like, yeah, I was curious whether I'm correct or not. And I found no conclusive evidence for symmetry being even remotely noticeable of a factor in terms of attractiveness, per se. All right? I mean, except for obvious cases when your face is like really deformed. But I'm talking about, you know, like just a regular human being, which is inherently asymmetrical, at least a little bit. So I'll give you links specifically to papers which say that facial symmetry is good, facial symmetry may not be so good, or facial symmetry is actually bad. So there you go. Choose your own poison, so to speak. And again, obviously, there are some things that can possibly be reflected on your facial symmetry, in particular, like some genetic factors, like some cardiovascular potential diseases, genetic ones, I mean, or aging also may increase asymmetry, like various dental issues, bad posture, injuries, strokes, things like that. So it makes sense that people are suspicious of like high degrees of asymmetry. But if it's only very mild, then I would say it's not a factor at all, right? I mean, I'm making a case for this being like a evolutionary factor, you know, in terms of like sexual selection and stuff. Yeah. And so my point still stands that completely symmetrical face is terrifying, just like any insect is, all right? This level of terror, or even more terrifying, arguably. Like maybe you've tried, it's kind of a known type of game, type of trick, you know. You take your own photo and you like take only one half of it and mirror it to the other half, so you're perfectly symmetrical, but it's only like one half of your face on both sides, right? Or you take the other one. So it looks horrible. I mean, if you've ever tried it, if you haven't, well, you may. It looks pretty horrible, like whichever side you choose, actually. I'll show you examples of, I mean, you may try it on my face if you wish, but I'll show you examples of various, you know, celebrities and stuff, or maybe random people on the screen, so you can see that it looks actually really horrible. And so one factor in it looking horrible is obviously that it looks different, you know, and hence unfamiliar, like if you do it to your own face or some celebrity's face. But I think there is some extra uncanniness about it on top of it, or even rather below it, right? Some fundamental stuff. Because like in terms of unfamiliarity, you may notice again that if somebody takes your photo on camera, you look different because you are used to looking at yourself in the mirror, which mirrors your image, and camera doesn't, right? So you look different on the photo rather with respect to the mirror, because you are a mirror image, so to speak. But you're still not looking as horrible as if you just mirror your face, like one half of it, right, to the other one. So there seems to be generally some unnaturalness about this perfect symmetry, you know. Again, speaking about myself, I'm not sure it's relevant information, so you may skip this small segment. So I'm actually quite asymmetrical myself, like both my face and my body. Like, if you can describe it simply, it's like my right half, like this one is my right for me. It's kind of smaller, but at the same time more dense, sort of more strong, but it's small. And the left side is kind of more stretched out. It actually looks, by the looks of it, I think, again, don't quote me on that, but I have like an intuitive feeling that I have more of my mother image on my left side and more of my father's image on my right side, and probably my body as well. So my right arm, for example, is shorter than the left one by maybe 1 centimeter or something like that. So roughly 1% or something like that. So it's barely noticeable, but I notice it, right? And it's stronger as well, my right arm. And the same for the legs. That's why I'm slightly limping actually when I'm walking. Like my right leg, this one, is shorter than the left one, so I'm kind of falling on my right one, then kind of pivot on the left one, then fall on the right one again, and like I walk like that, like slightly limping. But again, it's barely noticeable. Only if you know that this is the case, you might look at it and say, well, maybe something like that is there. Yeah. And I think basically every human being is like that to a degree. Of course, you might not notice it even with yourself. Maybe you're not as asymmetrical as I am. But there is always something like that, like a little bit, maybe a fraction of percent of the size difference and stuff. All right. So that was about humans. And I was thinking about other examples where we can potentially look at beauty versus symmetry kind of issue. And I thought about architecture, right? Because again, it's visual and it's usually very symmetric, right? Usually they try to make all the buildings, well, sometimes deliberately asymmetric, at least on one axis or something to that effect. But usually they're pretty symmetric, right? So the question is, why do they look beautiful, especially, you know, like classical architecture and stuff? Well, I actually don't have an answer, at least a clear one. But one possible answer is that, well, it's big, and as symmetrical as you may try to make it, it would still be slightly asymmetrical, right? Like, it's not an insect, it's not a very small thingy. Well, but it sounds like a weak answer, right? So, one other possible answer is that we cannot possibly, again, due to the sizes and stuff, and perspective especially, we cannot possibly grasp the whole building. And we also look at it from one side, firstly, and again, secondly, there is perspective, right? So it doesn't even look symmetric in the first place. But we kind of know it is, right? So maybe it's actually one of the parts of why architecture is so beautiful, is because we look at it, we see it as asymmetric, but we know it is symmetric, right? So it has this sort of mystery to it. We want to grasp this symmetry, sort of internalize, almost eat it in some way, you know, like consume it, but we can't. Like it eludes us. Like we walk around, but we can't see this symmetrical picture, right? Something like that. So that's what I think about it. And one other potentially important factor is that we know it's man-made, firstly, and secondly, it's immobile, right? So it's both of these factors say it's not dangerous. I mean, the house can crumble and fall onto you, but at least supposedly it shouldn't, right? Like, it's an anomaly, not like an absolute minority of houses actually fall onto people and stuff. All right, so so it is safe by design. That's what I wanted to say. Well, yeah, I guess that would be all. So let's just conclude this. So I wanted to raise this point, okay? So because that again. Well, okay. Let's just go into the conclusions. So. Here I make the case that in general, symmetry is intuitively perceived as something unnatural and hence potentially dangerous. And thus, perfectly symmetrical creatures and images are quite terrifying, at least in comparison to their almost exact copies, but with slight asymmetry to them, right? And human faces and bodies need at least a slight bit of asymmetry as well to still be recognized as human, as being alive and beautiful, potentially attractive. Otherwise, they would easily fall into this sort of uncanny valley. And we've also discussed architecture a bit. So again, the point of this video is to raise a point. Is symmetry actually beautiful? So I'm returning to the point I made at the beginning, that I think symmetry is only beautiful when we don't expect to find it, but suddenly do, right? Something like that. Like, roughly speaking, a symmetry of a cyclone, when we look at it from space, right? It looks like a cool spiral. I mean, obviously it's not like bilateral symmetry, but it's some kind of symmetry, right? So we don't expect to find like a random air pattern to form something like this, and we say, wow, this is cool, right? Something like that. But then again, the case of insects, the case of this mirror imaging, it shows that, yeah, sometimes even if we don't expect to find it, and we do, it actually looks horrible. So yeah, hopefully I've made enough noise with this video that the point would be at least discussed sometime by someone, somewhere, one day. All right, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.